Greg, always great to talk with you. The guys came up with an interesting poll question that I haven't even chimed in on myself yet. But let's just say...
So we're going to get to this for the first time, but I appreciate you mentioning the matchup show. I'm really excited about it. Louis Riddick, I'm sure you've been around him a little bit. He's really, really smart, really going to be fun working with him. And, of course, Sal Pal is Sal Pal.
Exactly. It's going to be awesome. And I think a lot of people already do DVR it, but if you haven't ever watched it because it's on early on Sunday, I always call it the show that the pros watch because I know a lot of players and coaches end up watching that when they're in their hotel room.
I'll tell you one very quick story. I won't mention any name just because it's not necessary, but sometimes when I'm watching pregame shows on Sunday morning, I hear the exact phrases that we use on the matchup show. So I know that it's being watched by the people who do the Sunday pregame shows.
Yep, that doesn't surprise me at all, Greg. Hey, let's get to the poll question, though, before I get into tonight's game a little bit with you. I don't know if it was Paulie or McLovin that came up with it, but the question is, let's just say you were starting a team or there was an expansion franchise, and you could get the best quarterback in the NFL or the best head coach or the best GM, which one would you pick? Would you pick Aaron Rodgers or Belichick or John Schneider, whoever?
Because there's so many variables. Okay, let me give you a quick story, okay, that plays to your question. Okay, I was fortunate enough to know Bill Walsh pretty well. So he coached Dan Fouts in 1976 as the offensive coordinator in San Diego. Then, of course, he coached Joe Montana. So he told me that there were certain routes that he didn't use with Joe Montana that he used with Dan Fouts because he said Joe didn't make those throws real well and Dan Fouts did. So now most people would think, oh, my God, it's Joe Montana. He's the best quarterback ever or the second best, whatever you think of Brady. So, so there's coaching at its highest level, so it's such a difficult question because there's so many variables. When a quarterback is great, do we automatically assume that he's great under any circumstance, no matter what would happen?
Right, but for our discussion, I'm not asking you any variables. I'm just saying you're starting a team, you're starting a franchise. That's why it's a really
difficult question. I mean, sometimes quarterbacks don't make it for a lot of reasons, and they have a ton of talent. Sometimes quarterbacks who don't necessarily have a ton of what we would call great traits or attributes make it and become great. It's someone like Drew Brees without maybe someone like Sean Payton. If Drew Brees, was coached by someone else, would Drew Brees be Drew Brees? It's easy to say that now because we have access to the results of his career. But would that have been the case, in a different scenario?
Okay, so then let's just say guys we already know. Let's just say Bill Belichick or Aaron Rodgers for the next 10 years. Who would you rather have?
I would answer that and say probably Bill Belichick.
Yeah, I can see that. Especially because, I was just thinking of, Greg, what if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt? You know what I mean? Like, players can get hurt. Coaches aren't going to get hurt.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting question. That actually goes back. I always debate that.
That's a great question to have fun with, and I know people like lists. I just think for someone like myself who sits and studies tape all day and knows the variables, as you know as well, but I mean, these are fun questions to just throw around. But, there's no definitive answer. It's still a fun question.
What do you think? Let's talk tonight, and let's start with the Patriots. No Julian Edelman. What do you think the impact of that will be on the Patriots offense, and how do you think they'll make up for his loss?
I think there'll be some impact, and it might not be totally discernible, only because I think they have some other players who can theoretically do what he does. Fortunately, they still have Amendola. I think over time, let me answer it this way. I think over time as this year progresses, and I think you saw it a little bit toward the end of last year, when they didn't have Cooks and didn't have Dorsett, I think you'll see a little more vertical element to the pass game. as I said, it started a little last year. Hogan was the beneficiary at times. The last time they were really vertical in any meaningful way was with Randy Moss. But I think you'll see that a little more just because now the players at wide receiver will allow them to at least build some of that into their offense.
Do you think that, Greg, explains them trading for Brandon Cooks and more recently trading for Philip Dorsett? It seems like, they were the first one to really focus on the slot receivers, the middle of the field. Is this another example of the Patriots kind of zigging while everybody else zagging, getting these deep threats?
No, I think it's dimensions. Look, Bill Belichick's a whole hell of a lot smarter than I am, obviously, but I think it comes down to dimensions within an offense. I mean, Brady's great, no question. Brady wins before the ball snapped. He has phenomenal rapport with veteran receivers like Edelman, who's now not there, where they can make decisions in a split second after the ball snapped with so many of their choice routes and option routes. But I think that every coach would like every dimension that you can have on an offense, and that you could argue that the dimension they didn't have, Hogan gave it to them to some degree later in the season, but certainly Cooks and theoretically Dorsett, if he can acclimate quickly, are true vertical guys. They give you a vertical dimension, which theoretically they didn't have.
Talking with Greg Cosell, he's a buddy of mine. Get a chance to talk to him each and every week. He is longtime NFL films guru, and for the first time this year, you're going to see him on the tube on ESPN's NFL Matchup Show. He's been the executive producer forever since the inception of the show, but now you can see him on TV with Sal Palantonio and Louis Riddick Saturdays and Sundays. Check your local listings, ESPN, ESPN2, all over that. Let's go to the other side, Greg, and talk about the Chiefs a little bit. Tyreek Hill, when the Chiefs moved on from Jeremy Maclin, I felt like they were telling us something significant about Tyreek Hill. Is there a player that you can give us a comparison of, I think the Chiefs think Tyreek Hill can be this guy?
Well, we get to the same question of dimensions. Tyreek Hill is truly explosive. He's explosive vertically. Andy Reid in his career, Ross, has not been that much about isolation routes on the perimeter for wide receivers where they just win one-on-one. He's been a lot more about route concepts and combinations. And Hill may give them the opportunity where he can line up that receiver on the outside at times, and he can win, number one, but number two, he forces a defense to respond to him with help over the top, which opens up other areas of the field, because Travis Kelce may be the most multidimensional receiving tight end in the league right now. So I think that, again, it comes back to that same word, dimensions. Now you have an explosive guy who, on the blackboard, is a Deshaun Jackson type of player. I'm sure they're hoping he develops into that kind of player in their pass game.
So, obviously, he's a good player, Greg. I'm just curious, with him at least playing on Sunday night, let's get to the Giants and the Cowboys a little bit. How much of a difference do you think Zeke Elliott makes over the backups there in Dallas, McFadden and the guys, when you watch the tape?
That's a really tough question. I mean, 2 years ago, DeMarco Murray gained 1,845 yards. The year after that, McFadden in 12 starts gained about 1,050 yards. They've got the best offensive line in football. You could argue that Smith is the best left tackle in the game. You could argue that Martin's the best right guard in the game. Frederick is up there as potentially the best center in the game. So they have a dominant offensive line. Normally, if you have a back that has any kind of ability and you're committed to the run with a great O-line, you will gain yards running the football. You know that, Ross. I mean, you're an old offensive lineman, and I mean old in the nicest way possible. They'll gain yards running the football. I spent a lot of time watching the Cowboys offense this offseason, and one thing that to me really stood out about Zeke Elliott is how good he was in pass protection. He was very aware of fronts and pressures. He was a physical, aggressive pass protector. He's obviously a very good runner. That's not the point, but he was really good in pass protection.
So I know, Greg, that you get excited to watch the tape. I mean, you get excited to go in there Monday and unpack it and watch. Is there a player or team that you're especially intrigued to watch this year? Like, you just can't wait to watch this player every week or this team every week?
I would say one team that fits into that category for me is Tennessee. Because I think that under Mike Mularkey, they have a clear, defined approach as to how they want to play. Last year, a lot of people might not be aware, but they had an 8 or 9 game stretch where they averaged over 30 points per game. And I don't think people think of them that way. And yet they went out and drafted Corey Davis, whose health is coming back, and I think will be a situational player this week. They drafted Taywan Taylor in the 3rd round. So they're looking to keep expanding their explosive playability. I think Mariota is an improving player. And I think if they can get some quality corner play, and that's a question mark, I think their defense can be really solid. So to me, they're a team that's building the right way, and I don't know if this is the year they're truly ready, but I think to me they're a fascinating team to watch.
I know you like watching all of them, Greg, but out of the rookie quarterbacks, forget Kaiser because we know he's starting, but out of the 3 guys that aren't starting, Trubisky, Mahomes, Watson, who are you most looking forward to when they get a chance to actually get some regular season starts under their belt?
Well, I would say the player that most intrigues me, and there's so many elements to him and so many variables, is Mahomes because of his pure arm talent. But he's a guy that needs an awful lot of work because he's so lacking in his fundamentals and his understanding, which is coaching. So it's all a matter of when it comes, if it comes. But clearly, just for someone who believes in arm talent and believes in arm strength at the NFL level, Mahomes is a fascinating and intriguing guy to watch.
Well, you're an intriguing listen, Greg. Every time I get a chance to talk with you each and every week, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Ross. Thanks for having me.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.